In 2015, Theranos was valued around $9 billion. By 2018, it was shutting down. In 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted of investor fraud. Elizabeth Holmes entered Stanford as a chemical engineering student. In 2003, she left during her second year and started the company that became Theranos. Holmes was 19 when she founded the company. The pitch was simple: blood testing could become cheaper, faster, and easier to access. The public promise centered on tiny samples. Theranos said many tests could be run from a fingerstick instead of a traditional vein draw. That idea sounded powerful because blood tests shape real medical decisions. If the technology worked, routine diagnostics could move closer to patients. The company name blended therapy and diagnosis. Theranos framed itself as a health revolution, not just another laboratory business. The machine at the center of the story had several names. Prosecutors later described it as the TSPU, Edison, or Minilab. The Edison was supposed to automate testing inside a compact device. The vision was a small machine producing fast results from very little blood. Theranos also built a reputation for secrecy. The company said its technology was proprietary, and outsiders saw very little direct proof. In normal medicine, claims face validation, publication, and regulatory scrutiny. Theranos often asked investors and partners to trust the story first. Early investors bought into the vision. By the early 2010s, Theranos was no longer a student startup, it was a Silicon Valley unicorn. The board helped create that aura. George Shultz joined, and Theranos later surrounded itself with famous political and military figures. Henry Kissinger, James Mattis, George Shultz, William Perry, Sam Nunn, and Bill Frist were associated with Theranos leadership circles. Their names signaled power. But prestige is not the same as laboratory validation. A board filled with statesmen could impress investors without proving the machine worked. Ramesh Sunny Balwani joined Theranos in 2009 and became president and chief operating officer. He and Holmes ran the company through its critical years. The retail strategy began before the technology was ready. Theranos pursued major deals to put blood testing inside ordinary stores. Walgreens became the pharmacy partner that brought Theranos into public view. The plan was to place wellness centers inside Walgreens locations. Safeway was another major retail dream. Public reporting later described hundreds of millions spent preparing stores for a rollout that never truly arrived. The retail deals mattered because they made Theranos look commercially ready. Big partners suggested that the technology had passed serious checks. According to the SEC, Holmes told investors Theranos could expand to hundreds of pharmacy stores. Those projections helped sell the growth story. By 2014, Theranos had reached a valuation widely reported around $9 billion. Holmes was celebrated as a young billionaire founder. Magazine covers and television interviews made the story even bigger. Holmes presented a black turtleneck image of discipline, mission, and certainty. The media story was irresistible. A young founder had supposedly challenged old laboratory giants with a box, a drop of blood, and ambition. Some scientists were more cautious. Stanford professor John Ioannidis noted the lack of peer-reviewed Theranos research in the medical literature. That gap mattered. Healthcare does not run on founder charisma, it runs on repeatable data, validated methods, and accurate results. Inside Theranos, the core device was not performing as advertised. The SEC later said the proprietary analyzer ran only a small number of tests. The company publicly offered a broad menu of tests. But regulators and prosecutors later described a much narrower reality inside the labs. Theranos relied heavily on conventional commercial analyzers made by other companies. Some were modified to handle fingerstick samples. Before the 2013 Walgreens launch, SEC filings say engineers were asked to modify third-party machines. The Minilab still was not ready. Theranos staged demonstrations with its own devices visible in the room. According to the SEC, some tests were actually processed on modified third-party machines. Visitors saw rows of Theranos equipment and heard a story of miniaturized diagnostics. They were not always seeing how patient testing was really performed. The company did not tell key retail partners the full technological picture. The gap between the pitch and the lab kept widening. Revenue projections also stretched far beyond reality. Prosecutors said Holmes told investors Theranos would pass $100 million in 2014 revenue. The same evidence showed Theranos actually had negligible or modest revenue in 2014 and 2015. The business model was not matching the forecast. Theranos also promoted military use. The SEC and DOJ later said the technology was not deployed on the battlefield as represented. Investors also saw validation materials tied to major pharmaceutical companies. Prosecutors said reports used logos in ways that falsely suggested endorsement. Some employees saw the problems firsthand. They saw quality control issues, failed checks, and a technology that did not match the public claims. The danger was not theoretical. Blood tests can guide medication, diagnosis, and follow-up care, so inaccurate results can send patients in the wrong direction. Tyler Schultz was one of the employees who raised concerns. He had joined Theranos after graduating from Stanford and worked around the Edison project. Erica Chung also worked inside the lab and later became a whistleblower. She raised concerns about testing quality and patient safety. Schultz tried to raise concerns internally. When that failed, he became an important source for reporting that would expose the company. Chung contacted regulators after leaving Theranos. Her warnings helped bring outside scrutiny to problems that patients and investors could not see. Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou began investigating. Former employees, doctors, and documents helped him test the company's claims. In October 2015, the journal published its first major Theranos expose. It reported that Theranos often used traditional machines instead of Edison devices. Theranos denied the reporting and fought back publicly. Holmes went on television and said the company was being attacked for changing things. Regulators were already looking closer. FDA inspection reports raised concerns around Theranos blood collection devices and quality systems. Walgreens paused expansion after the reporting and regulatory pressure. The public retail dream started to shrink instead of scale. In January 2016, CMS said the Newark lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. That phrase was devastating. Theranos had to deal with test accuracy questions directly. Doctors and patients were no longer just hearing doubts, they were receiving corrections. In 2016, Theranos voided 2 years of Edison test results. A company built on confidence was now retracting its own lab output. Walgreens terminated its Theranos partnership in June 2016. The wellness centers that once symbolized the future became evidence of a failed rollout. Safeway's deal had already fallen apart after delays and testing concerns. Another pillar of the retail expansion was gone. Sunny Balwani left Theranos in 2016. The company was facing regulators, partner exits, lawsuits, and a collapsing reputation. Theranos closed labs and laid off employees. The company shifted its story again, but the original blood testing promise had broken. By 2017, the company was a shadow of its peak. The famous board was reworked, stores were closed, and regulators kept pressing. On March 14, 2018, the SEC charged Theranos, Holmes, and Balwani with massive fraud. The agency said investors had been deceived. Holmes settled the SEC charges without admitting or denying the allegations. She agreed to penalties, share returns, and a public company officer and director bar. In June 2018, federal prosecutors charged Holmes and Balwani with wire fraud and conspiracy. The Theranos story had moved from scandal to criminal court. That same year, Theranos finally ran out of room. In September 2018, the company told shareholders it would dissolve and distribute remaining assets to creditors. The peak valuation had collapsed to nothing for equity holders. A company once treated as the future of blood testing was effectively worthless. Holmes's criminal trial began in 2021 in federal court in San Jose. Prosecutors focused on what she told investors about technology, revenue, and partnerships. The trial lasted 15 weeks. The jury heard evidence that Holmes knew the analyzer had accuracy and reliability problems. Jurors also heard that Theranos used conventional machines for much of its testing. That detail cut directly against the public Edison story. On January 3, 2022, the jury reached its verdict. Holmes was found guilty of 1 conspiracy count and 3 wire fraud counts tied to investors. She was acquitted on patient-related counts, and the jury deadlocked on others. The conviction still confirmed criminal investor fraud. On November 18, 2022, Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in prison. The Silicon Valley icon became a convicted felon. Balwani was tried separately and convicted in 2022. The criminal cases showed that Theranos was not just a failed startup. The lesson is harsh because the industry was healthcare. In medicine, a persuasive demo cannot replace accuracy, validation, and patient safety. Theranos did not fall because blood testing was boring or because ambition was wrong. It fell because the proof never caught up with the promise. The file on Theranos ends with a simple rule: trust the data, not the mythology. Subscribe to the Fall Files for the next case.